こんばんは.
Good evening.
I'm Megumi. I'm born and raised in Tokyo.
I'm Yasmin, born in Iran and living in Tokyo.
I'm Gemma from Australia, and this is the 4th episode of Movement for Room 303 Radio, a 6-part series that examines resistance to the status quo and confronts long-standing injustices in the places we call home, from Tokyo to Tehran.
In tonight's episode, we're talking about corporatization, corporate greed, corporate culture, workers' rights, and resistance all around it.
Workers push back in big and small ways through formal labor organizing like unions and walkouts, simple acts of refusal like quiet quitting, and even bigger acts of refusal like getting off the wheel altogether.
We're actually all sort of ex-corporate girlies. If you're watching this on the telly, you may have noticed our corporate attire.
Well, mine is, to be fair, a wishful corporate attire. Like, no one will be wearing a hoodie and a cap, probably, but this is what I would wish to wear. Probably my Gen Z in me is speaking to me.
The quiet quitting outfit.
Yes.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, techie outfit, no?
Yeah, there you go.
It's giving tech.
Yeah, it's giving tech.
Yagi-san, what is your experience of the corporate world? Do tell.
Absolutely. So I joined the corporate world like very seriously after graduate school. First, I worked as a derivatives trader in an investment bank, and then moved kind of in the same industry to become a stock trader. That has been all my work experience so far. I've recently quit the workforce.
Woohoo!
Yay!
Congratulations.
It's been a ride. It's been quite a few years, and I don't know if I know what's out there in the world, but it's very excited about quitting. How about you guys? What's your experience?
What is your experience, Gemma?
Just a little dabble, really. Like, I had a job for a corporation for 18 months working for an insurance company that is owned by Zurich Insurance. So, it was a harrowing and fascinating window into how for-profit these monsters are, I suppose. And other than that, like, I studied corporate law at uni, and so I was just very interested in the fact that, like, a corporation is a person with its own rights.
Yeah. Wow, yeah, you did study corporate law. Wow.
Oh, wow. I actually just got to know that.
That is impressive.
Megumi,
I worked in corporate for 6.5 years, maybe 6.5 years. Yeah, I worked at Line. I worked at now X, which who calls it X, but like,
let's
Twitter.
name it.
Yeah, whatever. Very tech background. The whole idea was that, like, I'm going to be independent. I'm going to be like the woman of my own and like make my own money. And like, that was so much fun until it wasn't fun anymore, and realizing how taxing and like tiring the industry can be. I feel like today we're going to talk about maybe structural issues of the corporation, from like the bottom up or the top down, maybe even. But more so for me, it was like more of like the cultural aspect of it was just so fucking exhausting that I had to like tap out, and I tapped out of it 2 years ago, maybe now already. And I'm freelancing and it's great.
So cool. Both of you quit. I just got made redundant, and I wonder, like, had I not been, would I still be on the wheel? I don't know. But as you say, if we're going to start by zooming out, Yagi-san, Megumi, whoever wants to contribute here, what are some of the biggest beefs that you have with corporations in general, or like the corporatization of things more broadly?
I have so much beef, I don't know where to start. To be honest, I think it's a part of being a human. Like, greed is definitely a part of, us, everybody. We don't want to like accept it. I don't think there's this like evil corporate kind of entity that's so separated from human nature. I think it is, but the current legal framework around what corporates can do and cannot do really amplifies the greed. And maybe we can, talk about it more, but the whole idea of stakeholder capitalism versus shareholder capitalism is very interesting to me. I think most of the developed, like quote unquote developed world, basically acts on shareholder capitalism, and that is an intentional thing. It's not like a force of nature. It's not like gravity. It has been legislated this way. There's actually a great documentary on Netflix. For people who know, like there's this guy Roger Stone who is like also kind of very involved in politics, but him and his group, when they were younger, they were part of this like group that they made lobbying a thing. So it's all like very intentional. Like when we see how much corporates have power these days, it's all through a lot of legal frameworks, and I think that's pretty much the biggest beef I have, because corporates have no, as a person, let's say if you have controlling voting shares in a company, let's say you're Mark Zuckerberg and you have maybe not 100% of your company, but you have a lot of voting shares. You pretty much have a lot of say in what happens in the world. At the same time, you personally don't have much legal liability. So it's like you kind of wash your control and power through the corporations. And I think that's a huge issue. A lot of people think, oh, that's like the best answer we have. I don't personally think so. But yeah, we're giving unlimited power through capital to companies, and especially people, individuals. Like when we are talking about corporations, they are basically individuals with voting power. Or individuals with voting power behind these companies. I think that's very important to have in mind when we are talking about this like abstract concept of a corporation.
Yeah, just two things that you said there that I want to unpack a little more, just in case listeners are unfamiliar with. Like lobbying as a concept that corporations can do. Yeah, I guess like a bit of a definition on that, but then also maybe an example of something that a corporation can do that's super shady, that somebody with big voting power, because of their ownership rights has done, like maybe to do with weapons or anything. Like, have you got some examples?
Yeah, there are quite a few actually. So, I can speak about maybe financial industry. So, if you talk to anyone, I guess with a lot of power or like a high kind of status in financial industry, someone who is like, let's say, a CEO of an investment bank, or someone who can do things, and usually these people are extremely politically connected. So finance is a very political industry to be in, the higher you go. When you talk about regulation, for instance, I have not heard, to be honest. I'm really ready and willing to go over all the news and see whether anybody is talking about how we should regulate the financial industry, because most people in that power, they want deregulation. And I was checking a few weeks ago how much lobbying money and how much basically money these big financial firms have spent in US elections. It's actually bipartisan. They pay almost equal amount. There are differences between individuals, and most entities basically, or most important people, quote unquote, in US elections, like they pay equal amounts almost to Democrats and Republicans, and usually the agenda is to deregulate. Basically means to have less oversight on what financial firms can do and cannot do, and basically let the game play out. It's like a game, and I think that's like one big thing that, after 2008, when there was the financial crisis, a lot of taxpayer money was spent to bail out these banks and these investment banks, and a lot of AGI, the insurance company. So basically it's not free market capitalism for them, because if it was really if you really wanted to deregulate or not have any government influence over how financial firms act, you would let them play and let them, if they go bust, let them go bust. But in reality, that's not what's happening. So a lot of times when things go south, these firms, they're so close to politicians, they get the tax money, they get bailed out, they get bought out by the other companies. Basically, there's always this safety net from taxpayer money. But when they're making money, they want deregulation. So that's like, I think, a huge point of contradiction in terms of the argument for deregulation. But yeah, that's like pretty much one of the cases, like in 2008, because of the speculation that a lot of, like, that was like peak right before 2007, 2006 was peak deregulation as we know it in modern time, and like that's what would like kind of eventually, you know, be the case when, like, you know, you make too many bets more than the money that you actually, it's like gambling without the money you have, basically. And after that, after taxpayers got angry, there was like a whole movement of like take over Wall Street, or like people protested. They regulated because they had to, but still, like, they first bailed out those companies, and then they regulated. They said you have to have a certain amount of capital for a certain amount of betting that you do, or investment, or whatever credit that you give. And now with the new, U.S. kind of, with the new environment with Trump and everything, now the deregulation case is going forward, and a lot of finance people are like, oh, great, you're back, we can play, you know, we can like gamble a lot more freely. So I think that's something interesting to watch. But
Totally. And yeah, I guess like with that taxpayer money being used to bail out corporations, we see across everything. Like in Australia, we have a national airline called Qantas that used to be publicly owned, and then it got privatized, and it's like a big corporate entity. And during COVID, so much taxpayer money was used to like bail Qantas out because it wasn't able to fly as much. And yeah, just increase profits, I suppose. But I guess beyond that, one of my many big beefs with corporations in general is that I feel like they are one of the main driving forces towards gentrification and displacement. Not only because of their enormous environmental impact and like the amount of energy that they consume and use and like spew out, but also just like a corporation like Google, for example, is not just a tenant in a city in terms of like renting an office building, but they're like acquiring so much infrastructure. Like Google owns so much land and so many buildings, and then these like high-paid tech workers who work for Google need to live in a convenient location in the city, in like, you know, sort of a mixed-use building where they're not going to leave the building. There's a gym in there and stuff like that. And I guess like one unintended consequence of a city back when like the industrial revolution and stuff was kicking off was that workers from everywhere moved from farms into like one centralized location. And so because people were living alongside each other, it was easier for them to organize and mobilize and unionize and fight for their rights because they could like meet up in the building they were in or whatever. Whereas now with like low income workers being displaced by tech companies and being like atomized, essentially like broken up and moved to the outskirts of cities and stuff, they have to commute to work to like serve food at Google or clean these mixed multi-use buildings or be janitors or whatever they're doing. And they don't have like the time or even just like the physical proximity to each other to be able to organize against that anymore. And then these corporations can just like, yeah, champion the language of liberation and talk about diversity and equity and inclusivity and stuff, but then like actually do nothing for these communities that they are like pretending to look after and care for. Yeah.
It's very interesting to hear about like corporations as like tenants, that concept. I find that so fascinating. Never thought of it in that kind of way either. And like, I feel like in Japan, at least, we often say like, oh yeah, that's the Google building, right? Or like we spot places or like we meet up or whatever based on that landmark. But it just reminded me, like when I used to work at Twitter purposely didn't position themselves in Silicon Valley. Like their headquarters are, I don't know if this is still the case. Like I literally have zero idea, but like, I don't know if they relocated, but they have, they were not in Silicon Valley. Like they were in the heart of like San Francisco. I think the street was called Market Street. And that was because like Jack Dorsey was like, so this was like presented to us, giving a presentation to us on like day one as like going to the headquarters, and like all these international like employees had to like listen to this whole thing of like this beautiful story of how Jack Dorsey is one of us or whatever when he's like a billionaire, whatever the fuck. But like basically positioning his company in a more like common place, I guess. I'm really butchering the presentation, obviously. But and it's insane because at least at the time when I visited the headquarters in 2019, like San Francisco, at least that area, Market Street, where it's like the most like the city center area. There's just fucking like needles everywhere, homeless population in every single corner. And then there's like Twitter. And so it's just like, what is this like disparity? It felt so dystopian, and all these like rich people, who myself included, who were getting this amount of money from that company, like walk along the street and getting an Uber, but yet we're saying like, oh, it's like scare, it's like be careful out there, whatever, to each other. And I'm just like, oh, this is weird. But yeah, that your comment made me remind me of that.
Yeah, totally. Because it's like it's displacing all of those people, and like Silicon Valley and like San Francisco and all those places have like completely destroyed and eroded communities. And there's like no memorials for those people, no like reparations for those people or anything like that. I guess the other thing that I find so wild after living in the States too was just like coming to terms with the infrastructuralization of corporations, in terms of like how healthcare has been corporatized there. But even like I was dating this guy who worked in tech, who lived in one of these mixed-use buildings, and I was so horrified when I realized there was an Amazon locker in the lobby of his house. And I was sort of like, hey, like, don't you think that's so wild? Like, isn't that mind-blowing? And he was sort of like, oh, but I have Amazon Day. And I was like, what's that? And he was like, oh, if you're concerned about the number of parcels that I'm getting, if I make 7 orders on Amazon a week, they're only coming on Tuesday. Like, I'm not getting 7 individual parcels. Like, they're just coming once a week. And I was sort of like, that wasn't my point. Yeah. Like, the packages is one of it, but it's more like, it's your postal service. And like, what do you mean you're making 7 orders on Amazon a week?
Crazy. I was like, what is he talking about?
Totally. But I've even noticed like there's an Amazon parcel locker in the lobby in my building in Sanganjaya. So like just the infrastructuralization of that, where Amazon has like paid the building company to be like, let's insert our locker here, we're the postal service. But like, how integrated into everyday life is Amazon in Japan? Like, do you guys use it? Do you have Amazon Prime? Like, do you get deliveries? Do friends depend on it for a lot of stuff?
I unfortunately use Amazon Prime, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, like, fuck, you order, I do it, but not 7 days a week or whatever, not in that way. But again, in an act of resistance, I think in my way of changing it in a very micro sense, I would only try to order something on Amazon if it's must necessary, that I need to get in bulk of like something by tomorrow or something like that. But yeah, I guess in my apartment, I don't see the Amazon locker. I can't think of but yeah, it's everywhere. It's in stations, like train stations everywhere, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, I use Amazon too, but recently especially, I try to like reduce it quite a bit because, because of what we know and how, like, I mean, I got like familiar with the way like a lot of people like talk about Jeff Bezos as this like self-made billionaire, where he solved such a big problem and he deserves the billions of dollars that he has. But then the more I learned about his practice of how he created a monopoly, now I'm trying to like order less and hopefully one day completely like go offline on Amazon. But yeah, it's like I think there's so much logistics built around it. And more importantly, I mean, outside their e-commerce platform, Amazon main business is cloud, and the amount of land that they have for their data centers around the world is just absolutely like mind-blowing. Like that's actually the main bread and butter for them, selling cloud infrastructure. And that's real infra. That's like using energy, using a ton of land. That's like hardware. So that's like actually a lot scarier, given how important the data as a resource is and all of that. Yeah.
I'm probably like skipping so way ahead right now, but just going off of that, of like selling cloud and owning data, basically like corporations owning our data. I think it's not about corporations, of my frustration of corporations more so, but maybe more, it's going to be more macro of like just social media and how like there's these tyrants who basically own these platforms basically. But I guess these days, to me, I feel like we had that like Web 2.0. This is my tech coming out. But like we had that like Web 2.0 era where like everybody was like curating stuff and like posting stuff online. Tumblr was big, and like Pinterest, I guess at the time, whatever. Like we were having so much fun on the internet at that era. Instagram as well too. But then Facebook, whatever. But then now we're entering this era of AI and like blockchains and all this shit where it's like owning our personal data. For corporations to own our personal data is literally capital for them. And that to me, and I mean, fuck, for all social media, right now, like whatever you do on that app, they just like want to know your behavior, want to know what you're clicking on, like they just want to know every single detail of you. And like that to me becomes the whole algorithm to me. I feel like this year and on is like such a topic to me personally. And like, I feel like I want to like work against an algorithm because like I don't want to be served the fucking most basic stuff on my social media feed, and I want to like cultivate my own algorithm basically that like I am interested in. But I find that so hard to do because it's like, again, they just want to feed you certain informations or whatever. Yeah, jumping ahead of the gun right there, but the idea of corporations also like kind of really physically almost, if anything, owning our like information does give me like a big ick, and like that makes me think like how to resist to that.
Yeah, and not just an ick too. I mean, I feel like it's not safe for them to have all of this information and data, and like, you know, Google's just removed that clause from its AI about like promising that it won't use AI for like weapons and war and stuff like that. And it's like, well, if they know where I go to work and where I shop and like all that sort of stuff, like obviously, yeah, jumping ahead in terms of what the future is going to look like, but it doesn't bode well, really. Yagi-san, I know that you were talking about using even like a fake email address and stuff when using AI, which is something you are only just doing now. Hey, I haven't done it yet.
Yeah. And unfortunately, like there was this news out after DeepSeek news came out that like everybody in the U.S. freaked out. Like they thought like DeepSeek technology is like impossible. They thought like U.S. is 1 year ahead at least in technology, AI technology, and with the CHIPS Act that like U.S. is like putting a lot of investment on chips and not letting China buy high grade like chips that they can use for AI. They thought they were ahead, and then DeepSeek came out, and everybody just like absolutely, just jumped on that train, and then they started using DeepSeek. And apparently, I'm sure it happens in the US-based companies as well, but apparently there was a very easy, because the company DeepSeek was not ready for all that traffic. And there was a lot of security issues, and there was like a lot of hackers trying to get on the system. And they could actually access a big chunk of their data, user data. And then after that, they were like, well, if you are using this system, chances are like your data is actually in hands of a lot of people outside DeepSeek, like employees. Just still, like even the company having it is an issue. But the first and most, I guess, the easier solution would be to just have an account that's not related to any of your personal information and use that for AI. But I started that off a bit late because my ChatGPT knows my biggest, darkest secrets. And I'm hoping that there wouldn't be a security breach anytime soon. It's so easy. It's like, convenience over our, that's also another human issue. Like we want the convenience, we want to use these things. But you're also being the kind of victim of this thing. Another thing I read today was, do you guys remember the game? There was this very early on game about, what was it, Bird? No, there was a game.
Angry Birds.
Angry Birds, yes.
The Swedish game.
Oh, was it?
It's a Swedish game, I think.
I believe it.
So apparently, initially, they started gathering user geolocation without user consent.
Oh.
And they first said that it's to stop people from cheating on the game.
Why?
Some random justification. And then they apparently sold those geolocations to governments to kind of like make money, and the governments could know where exactly the users are because like it's something like apparent from your phone, so you can actually be pinned down to a location. And initially I think a lot of things with tech is like that. They first justify it, it's because, or like Apple has this thing for child pornography that they say like they have access now to your photos so that they can run this AI thing to make sure people are not using Apple products. But But I'm like, really? Like Apple, like how can I trust that? Like
Oh,
I don't.
right.
I think they absolutely would do a lot more than that.
Absolutely.
With our information, with all our pictures.
Totally. And like if Apple really cares about child exploitation, then it should go to the Congo and like look at where it's getting its resources from.
Right?
Wow, I didn't know that.
I'm sure if you unravel, like, I don't know any materials enough to like talk about it now, but I'm sure if you look into it, there are so many incidents of that, like the Angry Bird incident where like the corporation is selling data to the government, like multiple, like if anything, all corporations probably. And it's just, it feels, it isn't that unethical, maybe, I feel.
Totally. I guess like, don't know how much smack you want to talk about your former employers on air, but I'm curious, like when you were at Twitter, when you were at Line, what were some of the more unethical practices that you saw going on, both at a business level, but also as a worker?
Well, as a worker, I have to say I was complicit in one of the unethical probably practices, which is like, you have to, if you're working in Japan in corporate culture, it's just like, again, you got to play the game. And I was in the sales team as well too. So it's this thing where a system enables you to be like, go out drinking until Tuesday, 3 a.m. in the morning, go to karaoke the next day until whatever. Your train is well gone, by the way. So you're using your money, your precious money with the fucking cab money, whatever, to go back home. I'm still living with my parents at this time. Your parents are like concerned, is this a healthy working environment? But you got to play that game in order to show your boss that like you're really in it for the thick of it. And then hence who were able to do that were the ones who ended up becoming like leadership roles. And that was myself included and a couple of my other colleagues as well too. The other ones who didn't manage to like, I guess like performatively do that kind of like nomikai cultures, like drinking stuff or go out for dinners or like kiss ass basically. They were kind of told like, oh, da-da-da is not into that kind of stuff, so we don't have to invite him. And like they become ostracized from like the whole community basically. And it's just so obvious in the parent that you just want to like be a part of the whole hustle game so much that because you know there's a validation towards the end, which is like a tiny little, we might talk about this later, but like, again, the Japan pay rate is so low to begin with, but you are going to get that incentive if you are proved to be like a good worker, et cetera, et cetera. Like there, if you cozy up with the department head, you get more like benefits, meaning like you are promoted, you get more money, et cetera. And so it's just like, I did end up playing that game definitely when I was working in corporate, and I didn't like it at all. I hated myself for it a lot, but also kind of enjoyed it probably in the first couple of years just because it gave me this sense of like, yes, I'm a woman, but I'm also like really like nailing it right now. And like the other men are just like not at my level. And like but again, it's not healthy because like these people like at your work, they're not forcing you, but again, there's this mentality of like, you got to drink this pitcher of beer at whatever. It's just a very, the boys club. If you don't participate, and don't get me started about the whole like playing golf thing. And like, I never played golf and I never wanted to. I resisted it so hard. But like my colleagues who ended up playing golf ended up cozying up with the CEO and like just, get to know each other. And like, if you pass with the person in the hallway, they would say like, oh, hi, da-da-da-san. And like, you will be called by name now because they remember each other. This whole culture, it's just, I was absolutely not a part of the golf boys club, but still I was complicit in a lot of it, I would say.
Yeah, but like, I don't think you need to feel guilty about that. Like, you're on the bottom of the chain.
No,
you're a worker. And like, there's almost like one mythology here of, we're all family here. And if you play into that, you're going to be rewarded with a management position. But also just like when something's a boys club as women, of course we want to like try and girl boss hard and feel like it's a feminist achievement to climb that way up the ladder. And it is in some ways, but then like, of course we know that girl boss feminism isn't feminism, et cetera, et cetera. But like, I can so imagine feeling powerful in doing that and what that would have been like. And like, I would have bought into that as well and tried to do that if I was in that position. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think like, one is, you're right, like playing golf or even like more. I remember one instance. It was like I think second year I was working, and I had this issue, like with a colleague, and the dynamic wasn't right, and I consulted with someone who's like just like 1 or 2 years more senior to me, and she's like very like high EQ person, very calculated. She was like, okay, this is an opportunity. You gotta go to your mentor that was assigned to you and be really vulnerable, because going asking for help makes him closer to you, and then do this da 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 da. And it was like also calculated. I'm like, okay, like and the more I stayed there, the more I realized a lot of relationships, a lot of things that people did or said was just so calculated. It wasn't spontaneous. It was just all like corporate strategy. And I think if you do that 10 hours a day, every day, that does something to you in your private life. And I think that like the lingo we use, or there's so many things, like, for example, talking about social issues. There are social issues that we absolutely talk about. We all like wear the same T-shirt, like for like LGBTQ, but a lot of social issues that we don't talk about. And that's also like I could see that each individual would also carry that culture, would also like abide by those rules. It was very top down, what you care about or talk about as a company, and it really mattered. So I think honestly, like doing that practice of always having an agenda, objective, and like calculating backwards, like even as a human outside even your normal work routine, how to get there, how to be political. And I think it really changed people, and I could see the higher up people are, the more like they kind of sounded robotic almost, like because they've been doing this day in day out, and that was like quite, to me, a little bit cringe. Like, why would you do that? Like, that's like a big chunk of your life. I think that's like one thing that really stood out to me, of like how just generally there's no spontaneity in like people's behavior and relationships. And the moment you change sides, or the moment you move to a different company, your relationships would naturally die out. It's like, imagine like spend 10 hours a day with people only for the relationship to be transactional. And I think that corporate culture, we call it the corporate culture, but that's culture. Because in like a lot of like in Japan, like most people are working in companies, at a certain age. And I think we just ignore that part. We're like, okay, that's how the game is played. I don't necessarily think that's the way we have to play it, but that's like the way it is, unfortunately.
Yeah. And I think sometimes that corporate culture can like flip to cult culture as well too, which is like literally how tech is based off of, basically like your whole thing about like on social media, people put LGBTQ t-shirts on, whatever. These are all like, I think like DEI and everything in tech industries, at least that I know of, so performative to me, I think. And like, God, like tech companies love merch. They love a merch so much. Like the amount of fucking t-shirts I had to throw away, mug cups, fucking whatever, water bottles. Like I just have so much stuff, magnets, pins. Wait, like, what do I use this for? But like now, if anything, like people are jokingly saying that like the Larry bird, like the Twitter bird, is now gone because it's X now. Like it's now like vintage. And like people sell it on like Mercati or something, I guess. But I don't know. That's obviously not okay to do, but whatever. Fuck it. But yeah, like this whole idea of like in my company I used to as well too, that like there was a whole DEI society like function, I guess, where like we talk about diversity and like we make it like let's make sure that we all care about these causes. But again, is that also extensive to outside of the corporate after you step out of the office? Perhaps not. Like it's probably, again, like that whole cozying up to like, who's organizing this? Oh, it's somebody important. Okay, then I'm going to organize it next so I can go up. It's literally just, at least in corporate environments, I feel, yeah, the performative aspect of it is just very cult-like, I think. Is
Yeah, like performativity in general. So shocking, I guess. Like, for example, like in Australia, somebody said something to me the other day about like how Australians love decolonizing, except when it comes to the actual land. And it's so true. because like we put land acknowledgements to acknowledge whichever Indigenous people, like whose ever land we're on, basically. So if I'm like giving a presentation in a room on like, you know, a Bundjalung land or something, I would acknowledge the elders and talk about it. And like this insurance company that I worked for, they're in Australia and they're also in the States. So in Australia, they like want me to acknowledge the traditional land that they're on, blah, blah, blah. Then when I set it up in the States, I like sort of did the same thing, got much bigger pushback from the American company than I did in Australia. But anyway, they also like joined this corporate initiative called 1% for the Planet. Are you familiar with it?
No.
It's basically like a corporate pledge to give 1% of all revenue earned, not just profit, revenue, to a charitable cause. 1%, like so fucking measly. And this particular corporation would just make such a big song and dance about it. And then they would also like, because I was able to choose the charities that we gave it to, I like wanted to try and choose something that was like about sovereignty and like land rights and stuff in Australia. So we're like performatively looking like we're for land rights. But then if ever I would write anything about like Palestinian land rights in a newsletter or on a blog or something like that, I would get in trouble. It would be removed. So it's like so performative. And another example was like, you know, we were pushing to be this sort of like diverse and like inclusive company. And so I was like, great, I've got like a friend who's a wheelchair user. She can write a city guide. Wonderful. And then it was like, you know, I was called into a meeting and like this senior lawyer or whatever like told me that I was so arrogant and entitled. And he was like, we won't insure travelers in a wheelchair like in this particular way. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, that's discrimination. But it's like, oh, okay, no, corporations have this sort of like exclusivity clause in the Australian Disability Act to say that they legally are allowed to discriminate against wheelchair users or people with disabilities because the cost of insuring them is so much that they're allowed to like exploit this loophole. So yeah, just like so much performativity in corporations and pretending that they like care about the environment or care about queer people or care about whatever when it comes down to it, like they absolutely do not. Like they're just for profit.
I mean, okay, sorry, this is a different performance, but just before I forget the thing, but I feel like especially with Silicon Valley type-esque people and the fucking Steve Jobs, the man or whatever, his whole thing, and I'm sure a lot of people who wanted to work for Apple probably, or people idolize like men or people like that who like give big presentations in front of people who are very beautifully well put together and blah blah blah. There's a woman, what the fuck is her name, who speaks very low and she ended up dressing like Steve Jobs, Elizabeth, that woman who created a medical company. Elizabeth Holmes.
Yeah. I think so.
Well done.
She like mimicked Steve Jobs because like she ended up dressing like a turtleneck was like Steve Jobs. Like she thought that was like the way that people would take her seriously. Like, and sometimes there's these tech guys who like go in front of the stage like barefoot because that's like, I'm grounded or something like that. Or like, you know, all of these, and like, I don't know, like even Elon Musk being kind of like, oh, I'm so crazy. Like that whole thing is also performant. Who knows? He is probably straight up crazy, but like also like you know, all of this creates a sense of branding of like that certain company culture, and people end up seeing that and like, oh wow, this company looks cool. I might be interested in working there or whatever. So like this idolizing a certain company and a brand because of a person too, I think is another aspect of like corporate culture as well. And yeah, like, oh my God, that WeWork guy, something Newman. Yeah. Oh my God, yeah, like that guy as well too. He was a nutcase, I think. But like,
the fun fact, he failed miserably.
Yeah.
He ended up becoming a billionaire, and for his second startup after the miserable fail, he could secure funding. So it's like it's failing up definition 101. Like literally, it's like if you're that crazy and absolutely like you have like zero shame for going back and be like, I'm back. And like people gave him money. Like if it was any of us, like forget about it. You have like, you know, even Elon Musk, he lied to get funding for his investment. He's not an engineer. He's not a self-made billionaire.
Nobody is.
Like, just read about his family history.
Yeah.
Like, there's so much. I think it's very interesting to think about these. You're right. Like, I think actually, to me, it's like we as people, like, we would never learn about how to understand what are facts, what to actually, like, see the kind of, see the impact of things or what's actually happening unless we're screwed over. And we're absolutely getting screwed over.
Yeah.
So I mean, I'm not happy about a lot of the like kind of casualties that this movement, like, you know, billionaires and like all this like advertisements having on people. But I think without that, we would fall for it. And I think now, I think people are waking up. Hopefully, I think it's a lot of like recently there's so much consciousness around class. There's so much about people are questioning these billionaires, people are questioning tech. For example, like I think a new strategy I've seen recently actually started with Sheryl Sandberg. So she was like the second in command in Facebook, and her she wrote books. I remember in my 20s, I just like bought the 2 of her books, like different versions, like I was just like, yeah, lean in. Like, I want this. I was like the sucker, like literally consuming all this bullshit. And she, with her feminine touch and like her like mother persona, made people think that okay, Facebook is not as evil as you know you would think it is. She definitely washed a lot of sins through her persona. And now with this dude, oh my god, the OpenAI dude. What's his
I
face?
have no idea.
The dude, I read about him everywhere. His name is not coming to me.
I'll Google it while you start talking about him.
So if you hear how he's answering all these questions about concerns about AI, he is like, oh, Senator, I'm also concerned. Yeah, that's something very important. I'm really concerned about this too. Meanwhile, he's securing billions of dollars for OpenAI. Like, are you fucking concerned? Because if you were concerned, you would stop it right away, try to solve the issues, and then go about it. It's just like there are new tools in their toolbox. Like, before it used to be like, don't worry about it. We've got this covered. Like Google or like Apple and this type of thing, or Facebook. Now it's like, yeah, we are so worried about it too. Meanwhile, we do whatever the fuck we want.
Yeah, because it's money, right? Like they need money, they want money. It's greed, it's capital, it's everything. Like that reminded me of like, again, there's another platform, Substack, which I love as a writer. Like I use it myself. I have a newsletter there, but like Substack is famously known to have a quote unquote, not a, like it's real, but like a Nazi problem. And like people are very openly able to say the N word out there as well too. And there's a whole huge like audience of like white supremacist and like neo-Nazi like newsletters, people who have like tens and thousands of like subscription models, and then like they will charge these people $9 a month for the subscription, and then there's so many people who subscribe to their newsletter, and hence there's a lot of people like that who believe in that on Substack. And Substack's business model is that they get 10% of the cut from the writer's subscription model. So a lot of this pushback has always been told that like, why are you guys supporting this? This shouldn't be allowed on your platform. But their whole deal is that like, well, we monitor our conversation and that's it. And their way of saying it is that like, basically we exclusively kind of monitor the conversation. Hence people who are racist will be just racist people talking about racist stuff the whole time. People who are not racist will be talking about non-racist stuff on a different algorithm, basically on their same platform.
Right, so they
like,
can have these two worlds coexisting without either knowing about the other.
That's their excuse, but they're not obviously saying that, but that's their excuse. But again, they want the 10%, and like the founder has, I think, he gave multiple statements about that, but yet never has like straightforwardly acknowledged the fact, I think. But yeah, it's just every single goddamn thing out there.
I know, and like honestly, it's very debatable. I can can live with the Substack model. I cannot live with the X model that, what did Elon Musk call himself? The free speech absolutist. But you
Bullshit.
absolutely can see that he's absolutely moderating or like changing the content or trying to during election. They're like, actually on Substack, I'm following a bunch of ex-Twitter people who are talking about their projects that they were running pre-election on Twitter to actually create a bias toward more Trump-related kind of content or push that. Or even Instagram. I don't know if you guys had the same issue. I sent you like some screenshots. So I was like following some kind of more lefty Instagram pages, and then when I tried to kind of push select follow, this way right after Mark Zuckerberg said that we no longer would like monitor or like kind of apply any algorithm to stop like hate speech or whatever.
Yeah.
I got this notification that this account is allegedly false. It like throws false information only for the content that was like a little bit lefty or like about class, about like, you know, socialism, whatever. Like those are actually moderated. That's like full like hypocrisy.
Absolutely.
At least Substack is like, we want the 10%, leave us alone.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it's not nice, but I think it's like the best we can get right now in this environment.
Yeah, and like that whole illusion of free speech is actually just hate speech, really. And like, have you guys seen, I guess it's like a bit adjacent to corporations, but whatever, it's all related. That list of like 27 words that if they appear on a US government page, that page is being deleted. And those words are like pronouns, diversity, like just all that sort of stuff. And it's like, why are you so threatened by actual free speech? Yeah.
I guess the more, like, I'm a huge Star Wars fan. There's a
It's anti-imperialist, isn't it?
Honestly, it's so relevant, everyone. Please rewatch everything. And the sequels, like, that are recently
And
made.
the sequels, okay.
I honestly,
Hot take.
like, Andor, you would be freaking out watching Andor. It's like current time history. It's no longer science fiction. It's no longer any of that. So, there's a part where they say when the empire is controlling more or like creating more, the kind of a harder grip on people, that's exactly when their power is being challenged. So it's not a sign of the power that they have, it's a sign of like losing that power.
Yeah.
That makes me quite hopeful.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're probably nearing the end of the episode now, so maybe we should switch to hope and resistance. But yeah, as you say, like the grip just gets tighter when they realize that they're losing it. And that is why we are seeing such a shift towards like fascism and like authoritarianism like around the world, I suppose, but especially in the crumbling empire and its best friends.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of hope, everyone, anything makes you hopeful recently?
I guess like the term organizing, as in like organizing workers or like, you know, organizing people to fight a luxury development or whatever, entering the mainstream vernacular more. And like, I mean, there is so much pushback to people organizing. And like just before Christmas, I know Amazon delivery drivers who are like technically contractors, so they don't have workers' rights, even though they're absolutely not contractors, were picketing in New York City, in Queens, and like, because the NYPD and like the US government is working so directly with corporations, like the NYPD just makes sure that the street gets flooded and the workers can't protest. So like, although there are so many barriers to people unionizing and organizing, that entering the mainstream vernacular is making me hopeful, I suppose. And yeah, like you two quitting your jobs gives me so much hope as well.
Yeah, I agree that we are a form of resistance. Absolutely. But yeah, I guess I absolutely also going off of that, like have that the fact that unions exist, I guess, is a very hopeful form of like resistance and protection as well too for people. And like we didn't touch upon this, but again, not to go off of it too much, but like workers, when it comes to workers' rights, and sometimes I work in production and like film industry in Japan, but there's no union in Japan, and we work with like American companies, UK companies, and we see that they are unionized and they get paid overtime and they have like Sundays off, or they are protected in a certain way. They have certain pay wages because they have this union for them. And it's such a it seems so basic, and obviously like also coming from a corporate background, it feels so obvious that I should like I should have those rights as somebody who is working. However, like now being a freelancer, being stripped away all my stuff, because in this country also freelancers are not protected by almost no law, that like not having a union in Japan within that industry is a very problematic issue.
Yep.
But my fellow, I think, colleagues who are the same generation are very much very resistant of it and being like, I don't think this is right. I think we should have a union. And I don't know, it's pretty cool to see, like, not that we're actually trying to unionize or whatever, but in a very small scale, people are trying to like raise our voices and say what's wrong, and like we need to be paid more and whatnot. And yeah, that really gives me hope in a sense.
Absolutely. And like, I guess like working together, you can win rights by like striking or like, I don't know, has there been anything while you've been on set that people have done to organize to try and negotiate better conditions?
Well, not like physical, like walking out of a set or something like that, maybe individual levels. But negotiating salaries it always happens behind the scenes, but it's just this thing where like, again, there's structural issues in the production industry, and there's also this moral, philosophical, weird issue in Japan where it's like you do gaman, which is like be just patient, I guess, or like tolerate it is like a big thing. So like hush hush, don't say anything. You got to keep hustle and like don't do anything. Is kind of, don't say anything, don't do anything is kind of the cultural zeitgeist probably. And not a lot of people probably raise their voices. And it's like, hence myself as well too, to be fair. But yeah, some, I would say. Minsky-san?
I think for me, like a lot of my friends, I mean, I quit, but a lot of my friends who work in similar industry or tech, who get paid, technically their lifestyle is pretty like good. I think a lot of us, we are looking for meaning now. And I think with the rise of AI, we would have a lot of problems. I think as humanity, like we would become redundant, and there would be no kind of immediate contingency plan for a lot of people. So that would be painful. But I think that would also open doors for like seeking more, because the model that like can be replaced by AI is more like an agency model. Like let's say a company has some sort of information that they can use that to make money, some sort of tech or information. If that can be outsourced to AI, then people need to do what people can do, which is creativity, which is like looking for meaning. And I think that definitely makes me very hopeful. The other thing, I think more Japan related, I think people haven't been very outspoken, partially because of deflation. I'm not saying inflation now with the current situation, because Japan is like importer of food. About I think 70 or 80% of food is being imported. Energy is being imported, and a lot of food supplies that we have are being imported. I think by inflation is actually going out of control nowadays, and I think it would be more so. And I think that's when you will see the younger generation, especially, would probably think that okay, maybe government cannot handle all these things. Maybe we should like do something for ourselves. And I think that kind of shake up can also create some social change here.
I guess also like. Ever since people have been working, like, which was when, what was before the Industrial Revolution, like agriculture or whatever, like people have been mobilizing and organizing as workers, and now we're sort of in a situation where it's like, okay, tech workers are the people who need to seize the means of production. And like, I think we were talking earlier today about how like people are using AI and Gemini, oh no, maybe it was me and another friend actually, and they're using it to work out how to hack Facebook and like, doing ethical hacking and like all that sort of thing. And so hearing about projects like that and all of these like things that I'm seeing emerging online is also giving me hope. Do you know much about that?
Yeah, I mean, not so much, but I know from the dawn of like internet as we know it, from the start of the internet as we know it, like it always has two sides. I really believe in symmetry of tech. Like you would always have actors who try to exploit it and exploit our data, but you also get like you know, there's a good documentary about Anonymous on Netflix as well. Like, it didn't start off as this like amazingly ethical thing, but I think that that's an interesting thing that people use hacking to, you know, to basically there were, for example, this anonymous attack in Iran. They hacked the jail footage in Iran. Like political, like prisoners were there, and there are hacks that like basically go after these like higher like IRCG, like higher military of Iran. Their like soundtracks got leaked. So there's so much of that being, you know, like I see a lot of that, and I'm really like happy about it. And I think with AI as well, like there would definitely be more companies. You know, if China could do it, I'm sure there are other companies
fully.
would be. And I think you can't have it both ways, right? At the US, like US wants to keep the supremacy of tech and currency and military like continuously, but it's an like impossible task. And I think that's also why the pressure is like building up for them to do all these things that Trump is doing, to like ban chip sales and like stuff. Like to what extent can you do that? Because today I read somewhere that about 30 to 50% of AI engineers in US are Chinese.
Really?
So, yeah. A lot of PhDs, 50% of PhDs apparently are international in the US. So like, what are you gonna do? Maybe like one thing that the AI expert was saying was that maybe if everybody have access to the same technology, then that would be a much safer environment than like just fighting over two countries like who has supremacy. So that is a potential outcome. We don't know, but I think the way things go, I think there would be more chaos, more diversity, more players, and I'm really looking forward to seeing that happen.
Just as you're talking there too, and like you mentioned like jail, and it's like, oh yeah, jails are for-profit like private companies, and like just like in universities, like people doing PhDs, universities are like for-profit corporations. It is just like literally everything around us is corporatized.
Absolutely.
What is not?
I mean, some things in Japan are, right? Like you have public health,
we do,
public water. Yeah. Anyway, as always, we're going to go out on a song or a poem, and today, Minsky, what do we got?
That's a good question because I already forgot the name of the song, but I absolutely love it. It's like, which side are you on? I think.
Yeah, that's totally what it's called. Which side are you on? Oh, what? Yeah, which side are you on? Wait, who's it by? I swear I saved it. Pete Seeger. It's an old one, a banjo track.
Nice.
People have been singing about workers' rights for a bloody long time, and I guess they're going to keep on doing so. You've been listening to Movement for Room 303.
Come all of you good workers, good news to you I'll tell of how the good old Union has come in here to dwell. Which side are you on? Which side are you on? My daddy was a miner and I'm a miner's son, and I'll stick with the Union till every battle's won. Which side are you on? Which side are you on? They say in Harlan County there are no neutrals there. You'll either be a Union man or a thug for J.H. Blair. Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Oh, workers, can you stand it? Oh, tell me how you can. Will you be a lousy scab or will you be a man? Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Don't scab for the bosses, don't listen to their lies. Us poor folks haven't got a chance unless we organize. Which side are